So, from the very beginning, God created the heavens and the. No, we're not going back that far. All right. We're going back to just a few minutes ago today. I got a phone call back from Sean, who's the interim director at CARE, and I'm going to play the recording for you. I'll try not to interrupt it every 30 seconds to tell you what's going on because we've done a lot of that. I do want to say beforehand, this guy's brand new. A lot of stuff that he says or may say, well, he's brand new. Try not to hold it against him, please. The other thing is, sometimes he says things like, I didn't know you had a file. Well, at CARE in the lower building, yeah, if you go in there, they have a file on you. Shelly has my file. The person who had my file before her apparently did some really mean stuff to it. So something that you might notice, my complaint is that these are mandatory reporters. They need to come at this with the same energy that they would go at if it was a 9-year-old girl who said, I'm being raped by my dad. The other thing is, financial abuse is still abuse. And he also uses a term that I don't use very often, developmentally disabled. And yes, autism is considered developmental disability. I have Asperger's, which actually should not be considered a developmental disability. We're not able to function under high-stress environments sometimes, but a lot of people have problems functioning under high-stress environments. I did explain to this guy at one point that I was raising my voice because of the rain. So, of course, one of the things that I'm afraid of there is that he'll pretend that I'm yelling at him. Another thing is, I explained to him that people with PTSD, trauma-related issues, the cops driving by, the rain, a truck that drove by that was really loud, all distract me. They put off the rails of the train, so to speak. When I'm not in a high-stress environment or a high-pressure environment, I don't have to deal with that issue. But I've been dealing with this environment, this type of environment, since before Natalie was killed, where I'm told that I need to go to mandatory reporters when I'm abused. A mandatory reporter is supposed to take the accusations of abuse seriously and turn it in immediately and fill out a report within 24 hours. That's specific to Oregon. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I'm specifically in Oregon. Another thing these folks keep saying is we'll try to find out which service in Tillamook is supposed to help you. Well, I've called every service in Tillamook. They have an autism society here in Tillamook that has not answered their phone in like 6 years. The other thing is I might get accused of not hating this man enough because he's a man. I'm equally sexist. When I see that a specific group of men is wanting to blame all women, I'll get on and I'll blame all men. If I see a specific group, either way, whether it's male to female or female to male, I will call it out and give an example right back. So the thing that he and I spoke about in this conversation that we had is the housing issue, but also that I went there to begin with as somebody who was being sent to mandatory reporters, and that at the very beginning, I was literally just being sent there for a room. I tried to explain to him about the situation with Miss Shelley and destroying evidence in my file, and also taking a look at the evidence that those things happened. Because if they don't make the phone call and say that these things have happened, which is what they're supposed to do as mandatory reporters, if they don't make that phone call, well, then they get to play on the developmental disability thing and pretend I just wasn't trying. Now, this guy's name is Sean, and that doesn't make him a good or a bad person. He did seem to listen quite a bit better than pretty much everybody else I had spoken to. I got rolling papers, but they got wet, so they don't stick. So my cigarettes fall apart while I'm smoking them. Those of you who think I shouldn't be smoking, well, I agree with you. I agree. So let's start this. There's some stuff that needs to be gone over at the end, and we'll probably end up having to make a second video because this is like a 30-minute recording. Not sure if you can hear it. I guess I'll have to hold them together.
Hello, Davey. This is Sean Schwartz. I literally just got a call from you guys. I was almost beating on my phone trying to get the thing to answer, and it just wasn't working. Oh, okay. Can you hold on, please? Yes, ma'am. All right, hold on.
I'm going to pause that. He called while I was in the middle of downloading the last video. As a result, my phone was just going super slow without reacting. So by the time I was able to get the call button pressed, the call button had already disappeared because they'd already hung up. Elevator music. It's way nicer than the FBI's music. Plus, they answer quicker.
Sean? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I'm going to transfer you to Sean, our interim director, okay? Thank you, ma'am. Hold on.
I do want to pause, and I want to state that you hear there how... All right, so she kind of does have a little bit of an attitude sound to her voice most of the time anyway. She doesn't mean nothing personal by it. You get to hear in that she did talk nicely. She did speak to me nicely. Which, before I went to jail for 15 months on false charges, not so nice. Thank goodness I was able to make a phone call back to that lady and let her know that it's important that I get in contact with the interim director quickly. And so she did make sure that she called him and had him get a hold of me quicker, which is good.
Hey, Sean, this is Sean. Yes, how are you? I'm not feeling too good, but I was finding it entertaining that we both have the same name. and I'm sorry, I'm autistic, so when there's a lot of noise driving by, like a vehicle just drove by, it kind of distracts me.
See, I let him know from the start that that's an issue that I have. Now, one of the things about that is that I'm letting him know that information so that he's easier able to work with me. He's got the right information. With a lot of people, I give them this information and they try to use it in a way that it obviously isn't meant. I don't tell you that I'm autistic so that you can take advantage of me. And this guy seemed to me, well, he did listen to understand at least that part.
And I'm living in a tent, so if it gets a little bit windy and you're not able to hear me, I apologize. I basically live in a giant plastic bag. No worries, no worries. Alright, so one of the things, the lady that I spoke with, Debbie gave her my number last week, and I didn't actually get the message until yesterday morning. I got like four answering machine messages all at once that go all the way back to November.
Yeah.
I had asked for the director because I gotta try to turn in situations with not just my records that are there, but also the ongoing abuse that I'm having to turn in. The fact that every mandatory reporter I'm sent to ends up sending me around in circles. I'm told that they can do something, and then when I try that, then they tell me, oh, well, my boss says we're not allowed. You know.
Example. And he's going to mention this later on, too. I'm sent to CARE, because CARE is supposed to be full of mandatory reporters, and they were also supposed to have a room that I could sit down and do what I needed to do to turn in the evidence. Well, instead, they wanted to just do the focusing on housing thing. One of the things that they say often is, we're not investigators. We're not investigators. I'm not calling you an investigator. I didn't come to you as an investigator. I haven't come to a single one of these people as an investigator. Not even one. I'm not claiming that mandatory reporters are investigators. I'm claiming that they're mandatory reporters. Imagine that. So the reason I bring this up with them being mandatory reporters thing is that I'm needing them, when I come to them about abuse, I need them to turn it in. Now, who is it they're supposed to turn it into? As mandatory reporters, they're supposed to know. As far as the police go, there's a safety issue with that. So, for my safety, these mandatory reporters, if they're going to be able to help me, they need to know who my predators are. The most important thing is to turn it in immediately. So I go to these people when these things happen, and they don't turn it in immediately. Or at all. Or I'm told that I have to wait until Monday when Shelly comes back. Oh, we'll schedule you an appointment for Shelly. Oh, somebody hit you in the ribs with a soda can? Well, we'll set you up an appointment for Miss Shelly. That's not effective. So, there's two different issues here. There's the issue of mandatory reporting and housing. These are two separate issues. When it comes to mandatory reporting, that needs to be focused on first. We know it takes a while to turn in to get this stuff with housing. We know it takes a while. And the amount of time that it takes to get housing, how many assaults do I have to deal with? How many threats do I have to deal with? And how many times am I going to be blown off? Now, these mandatory reporters want to claim that because they didn't see it, they don't have to turn it in. Well, that's not what the law says. The fact that they're playing that BS shows that they're either A, not trained, which is illegal, or B, they're going out of their way to ignore their training and lie to victims, which is against the law. Now, I try to show these people the evidence of what's going on, because if I show them the evidence, then they literally have to turn it in. They've seen it. They have to turn it in. So what do? They refuse to look at the evidence. They open lines of communication that are literally preventing me from being able to show them evidence. Like, for example, all of the screenshots that I sent of threats against my life.
I had to take I chose to take the mandatory reporter training in Colorado. Every state that I go to, I keep up.
I'm going to pause that because I took 2 courses, actually. One of them was an actual course that was put on, I don't remember who the guy was, but I remember that White Horse was the one that told me that I should go. And I want to say that guy had like 3 different sessions to cover everything, and a mock test, basically, to see if you'd retain the knowledge. It wasn't an actual test to become a mandatory reporter. It's just to see if you remembered that information. The other one was a police officer, believe it or not. I think he might have been either retired or whatever, but he was a police officer. And the thing that he came in for was basically a lecture on why it's important to do your job as a mandatory reporter. And he came in and he actually had pictures and a slideshow. He was showing a picture of a girl who was murdered because mandatory reporters didn't do their job. He went over the fact that you could go to prison for not doing your job as a mandatory reporter if it results in somebody being killed or somebody being permanently injured. And, you know, this is just a 1-day course, but I still took it. I still went to those things. I took an active role in my community.
Mandatory reporter laws, but I'm not a mandatory reporter. I've never been a mandatory reporter. The reason that I had to go through that is because as homeless people, we're blown off. My job in Colorado was as a homeless liaison, so it wasn't even a paying job. My job was to basically run around, take people to places where they wouldn't freeze to death, go to them to some of the services on 55th and Arapahoe, which is where like the Social Security office and stuff like that is, and you have to know when the mandatory reporters are blowing you off and refusing to do their jobs. It's less likely if you go in with somebody who's educated and aware of the situation.
Like a friend or
what
family
I've
member.
had to deal with since I got here is the same thing that every homeless man pretty much has to deal with. If you go to the hospital, you're treated like you're a drug addict. If you talk to the cops, you're treated like you're a drug addict, or you're treated like you're mentally ill. My quote-unquote mental illnesses do exist. I do have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I also have Asperger's disorder, which a lot of people take advantage of by trying to pretend that I'm delusional. Also, part of my speech...
I'm going to pause that. You notice the man's listening. He's not interrupting over and over and over again. Now, he will later on to say some of the same things as if I hadn't heard them. But I do explain to him, these are things that I understand.
Issues, part of it does come from PTSD. A lot of it comes from the fact that I have no teeth. So, a lot of times, the words that I say might be... Did I mention I have OCD? I'm not sure if you can hear that siren in the background. I can. Alright, so for a lot of us, it's both a PTSD thing as well as an autistic thing. I'm sure you're aware of what comorbid conditions are. So, for a lot of us, especially when we're in a situation where we're overwhelmed, stuff like that can basically derail the train, so to speak. I don't know how much training that you've had in autism or what your background is, because like I didn't even know what your name was until, I want to say, yesterday. Yeah, I don't have any formal training in autism, although I have worked in and around both behavioral health and mental health services else, and getting to know us is kind of the key to understanding it. As far as education goes, I think that autism education is important, and so is homeless education. You guys, I'm not sure, is this the first time that you've worked at a place where you've had to work with so many homeless people? Not at all. No, all right, very good.
This is good stuff.
Yeah, I know.
See, like I said, getting the right information, knowing who you're talking to and their level of education. What do they know?
Many organizations doing both housing and frontline community outreach and engagement for about 20 years. Very good. So you basically do hear what it is that I did in Colorado. You just get paid for it. Yeah. So in Colorado, we had to do it a lot different because there are a lot of services to help people, but as you know, there's also not a lot of money to go around for it. So what we did is, if it was specifically a pregnant homeless woman, we generally tried to either A, get her on a bus to wherever it is that would help her out, or if she had a job, then we would help to get the first month and last month's rent as homeless people. So, homeless people are able to come with that kind of funding in Boulder, not so much elsewhere. That's good work, yeah. Well, there's a lot of active people in the community who are aware of the homeless issues there, whereas it tends to be here especially, there just seems to be a lot of hatred for the homeless. The other thing is there's a lot of drug addicts, and that's not specific to Tillamook, and it's not specific to Tillamook homeless people, because the majority of the drug addicts I know here do have a roof over their head.
Yeah.
But as a homeless person, I'm assumed to be a drug addict, assumed to be delusional, assumed to be schizophrenic, assumed to be all of these things that people want to project when they're having a bad day. And it's not just the basic targeting. One of the things that the thing that I've been repeatedly sent to care about is that you guys are supposed to have resources to help disabled people who are being abused, the mandatory reporter thing. But the same thing with TFCC, the same thing with all the other agencies that I've been sent around to since 2022. Now, I get that that's...
So I want to stop here. The issue here, right? You've got two parts to your job. The one part is the housing thing, which is your primary job with care, right? The other part of your job is the mandatory reporter stuff that you need to do right away. My problem isn't that there's housing stuff or housing paperwork. It's that when I'm going there for housing, we do need to work on the housing stuff first of all. And when I'm there because somebody is threatening to kill me or assaulting me, that's what we need to focus on. Not this, all right, well, Sean was here to mandatorily report abuse to us because we're mandatory reporters, so we're going to try to pawn him off on the housing that we're not doing anything about. That's useless. You're still a mandatory reporter, and deflecting is illegal and immoral. You might want to focus on the illegal part.
That's not you at all that did any of those things, but the thing is, I'm still having...
See, he's new, I'm not blaming him.
I'm also having to turn in people who did wrong things into themselves, which makes no sense. When I'm being assaulted and I have to go to a place that's supposed to advocate for us, and I'm told, like, for example, I was told if I'm assaulted, since I got out of jail 6 months ago, on false charges, by the way, they had to actually drop the charges and let me go. But it was another situation where, 6 months of this, 6 months of let's fill out this housing paperwork, I already filled it out. Russell actually said that they had misplaced or lost that paperwork, so he gave me more housing paperwork to fill out. I filled out the more housing paperwork, and when I took it in the next day to give it to him, he said, oh, well, we found the housing paperwork, so we don't need you to make extras. So then there was the 3 weeks, and then where he was supposedly going to be able to help me afterwards, and then they transferred him to the night shift, so he's not able to be the peer support. Um, like I'm having to deal with now the situation where, like 2.5 months ago, 2 months ago, something like that. I told Miss Shelley that I needed my file. I also gave her some information from my file from TFCC because it shows why it is that I'm being run around in circles and why I'm not getting the services that are supposed to be provided. And in exchange for that, she was actually supposed to go over the pieces of paperwork that I gave her, go over them with me, and she never did that.
By the way, the reason for that is because that paperwork shows some of the crimes. I get that she's not an investigator. It doesn't matter if she's an investigator or not. She's a mandatory reporter. My issue with every single mandatory reporter, all the way back to before Natalie Bollinger, is that when you're a homeless man, they blow you off. When I finally got housing, that didn't stop the abuse, okay? I got housing before Natalie was killed. I finally got housing. Matter of fact, I got it almost immediately when I went to Nebraska. I want to say I had housing by November. But the problem is that, well, there was a lot of problems with that. We can go into those on a different video.
Is the housing thing. She wants to bring up the housing thing in almost every meeting that we've had and push the housing thing, and I keep offering to fill out the paperwork again because apparently it's been lost again. She said, "Oh no, you don't need to do that. I'll check the emails," and we've had like 4 or 5 sessions where she's said that if I got to fill out the paperwork again, I'll fill that out again, and I say that every session. I just got a message from Shelley saying that she's not going to work with me anymore, which, that makes perfect sense given the fact that destroying evidence and destroying stuff in my file is definitely against the law. When she told me that she took all of the bad stuff out of my file, and she also told me that there was a meme picture
stuff.
of me that was on their wall before I was arrested, and that it was eventually taken down and put in a drawer, and that 2 months ago she shredded it in a shredder. Well, I wasn't recording all of our meetings or sessions. As a result, I had to wait 2 months for her to admit to destroying any of that. I do have the screenshots of that, but it's not just that issue of that one little thing. It's a whole series of this situation.
Notice how long he's actually listened to what I'm saying. Now, some of it later on, it might seem like he wasn't listening. It's that he had made some bad assumptions. And we all do that. You don't necessarily know somebody's level of education or understanding the first visit.
Whole series of these abuses. It's a whole series of people looking the other way. Like, if I wasn't filling out the housing paperwork, that'd be one thing. If I wasn't repeatedly offering to fill it out again every time that you guys lose it, and I know that's not your fault, I'm just saying, Care Incorporated, because it wasn't.
Again, not blaming him in specific. He's new.
Or that lost it. If I offer to do it again, that's because I'm willing to fill out that paperwork again. But at the same time, when I'm a disabled person who's being abused, and that's what I've been sent for from the very start, is to turn in this abuse, at some point it needs to stop being redirected to housing, especially when I haven't gotten housing in the last 4 years and everybody keeps losing the papers.
I think this is the part where he starts talking. So we'll listen to that.
Let me ask you a question here because obviously, so we sometimes, I'm not sure which organization referred you to CARE. Sometimes.
All of them. All of the agencies here in Tillamook wanted to send me to all of the other agencies in Tillamook. Every agency that is supposed to have mandatory reporters, I went to. And they sent me to the other mandatory reporters. And you're going to hear him start telling me who I need to go to. And he's going to name off places I've already been. And all of these occasions, even though they needed to take the accusation seriously and turn it in immediately, instead of doing so, they wanted to repeatedly change the subject and not do their jobs as mandatory reporters, which is what resulted in the abuse to begin with, overwhelmingly. Then, of course, there's changing what's in my records. There's the stuff that was used in court to harm me that is obviously these people knew it was incorrect. They knew it wasn't true. And this isn't civil stuff, okay? It stopped being civil the moment that Natalie Bollinger and Alicia Bollinger and Maddie Boa coordinated across state lines on October 23rd of 2016. All right, it became a federal crime at that point. And the abuse since then, well, you get to see I'm going to the mandated reporters and they just changed the subject.
Organizations don't understand what it is CARE does. We obviously, our primary focus obviously is either in providing shelter or providing housing. The only abuse program that we operate is for domestic violence.
Not abuse program. Mandatory reporters. They're mandatory reporters. This is not an abuse program. This is a set and series of laws to protect victims from people who don't want to do their fucking jobs. That is not the same thing as an abuse program. But you also get to hear it's only a domestic dispute program. What does that mean? If you're not fucking, nobody cares.
If somebody thought that we operated some kind of an abuse program,
It wasn't an abuse program. It's you guys. I was sent to you guys because you're supposed to be mandatory reporters, and you're supposed to. Basically, the cops blew me off and sent me to you guys. That's what happened. The police sent me to you guys. I was sent to CARE. I was sent to TFCC. I was sent to Tides of Change. I was sent to Northwest Senior and Disability Services. I am a disabled person. I do get disability money for being disabled. So when it comes to the mandatory reporter laws, it's the same as if a 9-year-old girl goes to a mandatory reporter, be it the school nurse or a police officer, and says, hey, my dad's raping me when I go home every day. And that's not how it's being treated. I'm being treated like I'm only disabled when it is being used to pretend that I'm schizophrenic or delusional. And then when it comes to helping me because I am disabled, then I get treated like because I'm not schizophrenic or delusional that I don't need help. And this has been going on with CARE for a while. The thing is that I've had multiple people there at CARE tell me that they are mandatory reporters. And as far as being a disabled person, like I should be able to go tell a mandatory reporter when something happens and have it be taken seriously. But it's not taken seriously because I'm homeless. There's a lot of bias against the homeless. And I have to deal with people who, obviously, I don't do drugs. Obviously, I'm not schizophrenic. But when I have to try to turn this in, I have to worry that the mandatory reporters I'm turning in are going to pretend that I'm schizophrenic or delusional. And there's a lot of evidence that the fact that when I tried to turn this in, I tried to turn it in because these are mandatory reporters. The people who are supposed to help out the disabled, they sent me in the same circles. Every single agency, including CARE, TFCC, they all sent me around to each other for, like, I don't know, probably can't figure out the months off the top of my head because the situation is the important
About
thing.
a year and a half.
In between 2022, when I first tried to turn this stuff in,
years.
and when I was put in jail, all of these agencies continued to send me around in circles. All of these different agencies, I got to speak to the mandatory reporters who are supposed to be mandatory reporters in these agencies, and each one of them wanted to deflect and send me to a different agency. When
Or
it comes to
housing.
Melissa, I was there when Melissa was telling all of the people that work in the lower building that the police told them they're only to call the police or the sheriff's department if one of us is suicidal or wanting to harm somebody else, and that if we're trying to turn in somebody who had harmed us, that they're supposed to deflect. And that's one of the things with mandatory reporters and the housing thing is that every one of these agencies wanted me to fill out housing paperwork. And they're all mandatory reporters. I'm still disabled regardless of this, and what they've done.
They're deflecting. They're still mandatory reporters. Now, the message from Shelley, she obviously admitted to being a mandatory reporter. Then she keeps wanting to deflect to, oh, well, housing is the job. Housing is the job. My job isn't to be a mandatory reporter. Well, actually, it is. And she already admitted it.
My paperwork with the destruction of evidence, and then, of course, people who know that the situation, such as the Natalie Bollinger situation, are real, they're still pretending that I'm delusional despite all of the evidence otherwise. The stuff that's in my records and in my files there, we need to sit down with somebody who's going to take it seriously and actually review it with me, because, like, I'm being treated inhumanely and being run around in circles.